I'm Catherine Sheeran, host of the podcast Horse Tales with Cat. Today's guest needs no introduction. He is the owner of Wembley Farms, based out of Bedford, New York, and Wellington, Florida. He is the son of a very famous American composer. Norman Dello Joio won an individual bronze medal in the Olympics in 1992. He was part of the team gold medal performance in the Pan Americans in 1979. He was the 1983 FEI World Cup final championship and has represented the American team on numerous occasions. Norman, welcome to the show.
Thank you. Nice to be here.
I always like to lead with, how did you come to the sport? As I mentioned in the intro, your father was an American Pulitzer Prize winner and clearly was not involved in horses, but in music. So how did that happen for you?
It happened by accident. I was living in New York City. My parents were together. I had an interest that came to me because of the National Horse Show in Madison Square Garden. I remember as a early teenager, I would go out there and watch, and went and introduced myself to some of the team members at that time, that when there was international show jumping at the Garden, one of which was Billy Steinkraus, who was an amateur violinist. And so I had kind of a connection with him through my father. And yeah, I was living in the city. I took the train out to Long Island sometimes, or different places in Westchester to trade some work and mucking stalls for lessons and that sort of thing. When my parents got divorced, when I was around 14, 15, then my mother and I moved to Bedford, New York, and I started working there and riding and being working student for different professionals, and started to get some catch rides and that sort of thing. So in those days, anybody that wanted to work real hard had pretty good opportunities.
And would you say you were doing hunters and jumpers at that time, or had you
Very
already?
much so. Yeah. Whatever had four legs and a tail, basically, we would try to climb on and see what we could do.
Well, and I understand back in the days, the classical training was you did both as well, just because it really honed your skills. And yet today, I would say that's not very common. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think the hunter sport has gone off its own direction, as has the jumper sport taken over so much. I remember I used to go before the World Cup finals every year to my friend. He was an old great horseman named Dave Kelly, and he would say that, the hunters keep you honest, in the sense that horses jump out of a 12-foot stride. There wasn't a lot of interruption, and you were basically doing less interference. So in that sense, it kept you honest. And he was a very good horseman, and in his own way, he was a really good influence on me as a horseman, not necessarily his riding or his techniques, but his horsemanship. And I never forget when he said that. And I think it's still a really, really good discipline, and it's a good foundation in a lot of ways for a lot of jumpers.
Well, and it's also interesting. I noticed my own trainer, she has done a lot of hunters in the past, and I just find it really seems to have developed a very quiet hand in her, because I
Yeah,
think you have to be quiet because you have to
yeah.
hide it from the hunters. So
Yeah,
that's
the idea that less is more can be very effective later on.
mhm. And so who would you say were your biggest influencers as a trainer rider?
It's a combination of so many different professionals and horsemen. I remember I used to, and still do, watch really closely in the schooling area, and I would watch people train the horses, not just ride them, but train them, and I would try different things that different trainers talked about. I was lucky in the sense that, I learned a lot about horses' care from a very, very good groom named Jerry Johnson, and got a chance to really just learn a lot about basic care and how horses feel. And then I would say from care of horses, extend that to Bob Friels, who was one of the best caretakers of the top hunters in the country at the time when I was a kid. Huey Kerrigan, also a big influence. Then as I started to do jumpers and become more successful at that, and ran into a couple of horses that worked out, I guess Bert Denemethey was a huge influence in the fact that he had a system for everything that he did, and very much a consistent system that he never deviated from. Also, George Morris, very much a system for everything to do with the horse. Nelson Pessoa, who was a very good friend of mine, is a very good friend of mine, and spent one Florida with us, working with myself, my students, and is a very good friend still. There's just so many people. I love watching good riders. I love watching the top riders today. I try to take out of anything that's successful and look at it and see what piece I can probably put into my system or add to or subtract from. Or, when people ask me what works for me, it's really whatever the horse needs. So I tailor whatever program I have to whatever horse I'm working with and try to draw on my experience working with cold horses, hot horses, thoroughbreds, warm bloods, and every horse has a different character. So trying to find out what makes each individual horse work at its best. I've had the luck to run into a lot of people, and I tried to find out from a lot of people different things, and was always very curious, and read a lot and studied a lot, and didn't take tremendous amount of riding lessons, but was always trying something.
I love that you say that you try to find what works for each horse and that you approach each as an individual. And also the fact that you're continuing to learn, because I did spend many years training with Jill Henselwood, and she said that she really prided herself on still being a student of the sport. And
Yeah.
I think, yes, sometimes people have systems, but yes, you can't fit all horses into a box. So I just love the
No,
idea.
you can't fit any of them into a box. And horses have a way of 1 minute making you look very smart and the next minute making you look very stupid and getting caught with your pants down. So I think that that doesn't change. And that's what keeps us going to horse shows, because if we all had the same results all the time, we would quit, whether we
Mhm.
were successful or failing. So I think the challenge is to kind of keep going, to keep learning and keep growing. The sport has changed a lot, not necessarily in a good or bad way, it's just change. So I think in order to keep up, it's necessarily also to keep learning and to keep finding ways to keep up with those changes.
And what do you feel is the most different thing today as far as the horses? Because I do feel like they've evolved. I mean, we started with kind of the thoroughbreds, then we went to more of the
Yeah.
warm blood, but it feels like we're kind of moving back a little bit to that lighter horse to get more speed. I don't know. What's your observation?
Yeah, I think because of the animal rights influence and the changes within the FEI, I think part of the bravery aspect of the sport is gone. Horses that jump lighter material, they get hurt less, they're worth a hell of a lot more. So horses, at one point, I remember Michael, Matz, and I, or Ian were talking about horses that the average horse that we would try to do well on a Sunday afternoon in a Grand Prix, we would spend the week kind of preparing that horse to do the best we could for Sunday. And the idea of having to qualify was not so normal. So we would, in a sense, use some classes for training and try to get the best result for Sunday. And a lot of those horses wouldn't do today. They wouldn't be good enough. But we would pull it off on a Sunday. Now you have to go to the show ready, sharp. They have to be able to, most of the horses that are successful are really, besides being scopy, they're ultra careful, ultra brave, ultra athlete. That didn't exist. That was a big exception to the rule when we started. I started learning on thoroughbreds and was pretty good at that and understood riding thoroughbreds and horses with thoroughbred temperaments. And I still believe the best athletic horses in the sport have a lot of thoroughbred qualities. Unfortunately, a lot of those big bodied, beautiful thoroughbreds are gone, and they're not available to show jumping. So anyway, I think that sport has evolved to the point with horse wise that it's become a horse contest more even than a riding contest, because the horses are basically all so good, and it's driven also the price of horses up, and it's become so competitive to find and pay for a good horse. It's really difficult. Still, the one saving grace is horses don't know how much they cost, and they don't really care. So there's still the possibility of finding a needle in a haystack, or for somebody like me, finding a horse that's lacking in one department, but can be made up for in another department. So we keep going.
Yeah, speaking of prices, I want to go back to one of your mounts because what is quite memorable for me back in the 80s is, if I'm not mistaken, when you got I Love You, I
Hmm.
think I heard at the time the price was $1 million. And that was unheard of in those days. Am I correct in recalling that? I just remember it being the talk.
No, no. Up
Oh,
until then, I think the highest priced horse that was ever bought was maybe three or 400 for Jet Run for Michael.
okay.
Um, and when I bought I Love You, he was 500, the equivalent of about a little less than 500. We were using the French franc then.
Okay.
And I remember people asking me all the time, and I would just say, talk to the Lindemans. It's not my place to tell them how much they paid for a horse, but
Hmm.
um, it was around that figure. And no, it wasn't $1 million. It was probably a little less than half of that. It was a good risk. The horse had started stopping a little bit in France and needed a program change. And when it came over, it took a little while. We were all kind of holding our breath to see if the horse was going to work out as well as we had thought. He was a tremendous athlete, tremendous natural athlete. Would have been almost a priceless horse today in today's market because of his qualities of being ultra, ultra, ultra careful and quick and enough scope for pretty many things. So, again, as an example, besides winning the World Cup, he won Spruce Meadows, which was at that time a real big, crunchy course and still is today. But managed to win that as well at the Masters. So I guess when you were around, I had that horse. He was in that kind of intermediate stage,
Hmm.
figuring
Yes,
things out.
I should share with our listeners that I had the privilege of working for Norman for a couple of months back in the early 80s when I took a year off between high school and university, and quite a memorable experience for me in terms of learning and just obviously getting to learn by watching someone like yourself riding at that level, but also just working with the stable management and just taking care of horses. Uh,
Yeah, we had a good team. There wasn't this immigration problem. So we had a really good team from England, Ireland, people that had a real passion for horses that wanted to be there. And it was a real different scene. The biggest thing that's hard to find today is that kind of passion and people that want to work with horses. But that was really the 70s, 80s, early 90s were great for that. We had no problems getting people for that. And there was actually more people interested than there were good jobs. So it was a total, total, total change from what's today.
and I wanted to touch on that a bit because I don't know if it's because it's become more of a business, because I think you really pinpointed one of the things back in the day was people were in the sport because they were so passionate. They loved the horses, they loved the
Yeah,
rock.
yeah.
Why do you think that's changed?
Um, I think society's changed, in a lot of ways. I think that what we expect and our attitudes and how we change our behavior since the change in our daily lives. If I wanted to talk to you 30 or 40 years ago, I would just really think about what I had to say, and then I would pull over to the side of the road to a payphone and put in a dime and call you. And having already thought about what I was going to talk about or say or ask you, and now, if there's only instant gratification and instant answer, and I think that changes the way we operate sometimes. And I think one of the reasons that horses are very, very grounding in a sense that they're not machines. They don't give us instant gratification, and they teach us patience. And that's the one thing that probably is hurting us a little bit is that there's less of that. And horses are getting produced less and less. So they become more and more valued when they do get produced. They become more of a great commodity. We would think nothing about going to a show, finding we had a poor performance or refusals or rails down or things didn't go our way and go home and we wouldn't look for an immediate result. We would really try to analyze and work on what was wrong. And then maybe you'd see that horse out again a month later. You'd see it in a lower division, or there was always a sign of, well, we're committed to making this work, but we have to be patient. That's not our society so much these days. It's not how we live. It's not how we kind of roll anymore. So I think that's also a change. And horses are bred to jump now, and they get better and better and better. But at the same time, they're still horses, and they still need a moment, and they still need to digest, and they still need to have a good upbringing. Even the talented ones, and like talented people, they sometimes require a little more time or a little bit more insight. So I think that's probably lacking. I think the average trainers today are under a lot of pressure to produce results, or their clients will look elsewhere. There's just a lot of competition in that sense. A commitment to making things work if it takes a little extra time is probably a little foreign to a lot of people. It's not
Mm.
just to do with riding it. I'm not criticizing the horse industry so much as it is in general.
I think you really nailed it there. It's so true because it's also there's no breaks between horse shows. It feels like there's more and
There's
more.
no breaks and there's a lot on the menu and you feel like you're obliged to order everything on the menu. But I think you have to be really, really careful. And I think somebody that's put themselves in great positions, like Kent, for example, he's a great planner. He manages himself and his horses really, really well. I don't see him taking unnecessary risks or doing more than he should do because of a short-term goal. I think Kent's great about long-term goals. He's a good example of somebody that was mentored with people like Tim Grubb, Michelle Grubb, Leslie Burr at that time, and other top riders. And he was quiet, but he learned.
Mm-hmm. I wanted to shift gears back to some of your mounts. We were talking about I Love You, and you talked about a lot of his gifts. What do you think made the two of you so connected? Because you
I
had a
think
great
the
there.
I think the real connection was the patience that I had with him in the beginning because when he first started, I remember being dumped into double and triple combinations quite a bit.
Mhm.
So I took, instead of one step back, I took three steps back and started training him in schooling jumpers and small fences and kind of started the more patience I gave him to do it exactly the way I wanted, the quicker things went. So a year or a year and a half later, he started to be pop up and be competitive. And jumping the fences was basically the easy part. So understanding and connecting the dots of how flat work relates to jumping was the key to that horse. The jumps were the easy part, and you sure couldn't make him jump any better than he already jumped. So that didn't need touching as much as the trust and the relationship and the rapport that you had with the horse. And the trust issue was the biggest issue because he had already been through a little bit of trouble. I think that that's true of a lot of really, really good horses. When they click with a rider and they become hand and glove, then they can pretty much count on the very worst. You look at the worst day, it's going to be a rail down, but the best day is going to be normally a good result. So again, that takes a little bit of time, making the effort to understand flat work, understand how horses operate. It's like, how does a plane fly? There's a lot of good pilots, but how many pilots really understand what makes the plane fly? And I think that that's true with horses, and each one jumps differently or flies differently. So that's experience, and that's being interested in figuring that out.
And I would imagine that trust builds their confidence with you.
Well, yeah, of course, when you can trust something, then you have all the confidence in the world, and so automatically, when you have more confidence, you make less mistakes. So
Mhm,
the horse makes less mistakes, especially good horses. So
mhm.
when they're already naturally careful and don't want to touch fences, that's a big 33% of the equation. Probably more now because there's less bravery in the sport. We're not asking horses to jump banks, ditches, waters. A wall is a big event at a show normally, like oh, the wall is spooky,
Mhm.
that sort of thing. And we used to jump our best horses over jumping derbies. And if you look back at the videos of what we jumped in Rhode Island at Mason's show, you'd be like in shock what of what these best horses in the world were jumping, but and massive fences besides. That's from another time and another era. I think part of still what makes riders better and get over mental fear is dealing with their physical fear. So I think that is a little bit of a shame in our sport that it's kind of leaving. and we're jumping pretty much the same material at all these shows and very airy, delicate fences. But I think, again, part of made good combinations was bravery. And I think so that's less and less emphasis on carefulness and rideability and a little bit of scope are much more in the front today. It's going to continue to evolve, I think, because I think times have changed. People don't want to see horses getting in trouble in the ring.
It's interesting you point that out because I've noted even as an amateur rider, I'm jumping at the meter 10 level, and I used to get to do a triple combination on classic day, and I'd be Liverpools, and now all of that's gone.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
This episode is brought to you by the international law firm of Cooley LLP. Clients partner with Cooley on transformative deals, complex IP and regulatory matters, and high-stakes litigation. Cooley has nearly 1,400 lawyers across 19 offices in the United States, Asia, and Europe, and a total workforce of more than 3,000 people. Our connection to the law firm comes through Cooley partner and jumper rider Cullen Drescher, who competes in the high amateur and Grand Prix levels, in addition to leading Cooley's business restructuring practice from the firm's offices in New York City.
I said to Linda Heathcott at Spruce, glad to see you're keeping up with some of your old traditions and things like that at Spruce Meadows, and at least trying to somewhat make a balance between, but keeping some element of bravery in the sport. And she said, yes, we are, but I feel like I'm doing all the heavy lifting. And that's probably true. And I think that one shouldn't be surprised to go to Spruce Meadows and find that the time is tight, or that the horses have to run and jump and they have to do things that are jump double Liverpools in the last round of a $5 million class. So that is what it is. If your horse isn't trained for that or doesn't like that, then there sure are a million other horse shows that offer something different.
I also wanted to ask you about your mount for the Olympics in 1992, where you won the bronze medal. Tell me a little bit about that day, if you can remember. I know that was a long time ago.
He was a little Irish thoroughbred, maybe a Nicholsworth short on stride and a Nicholsworth short on scope compared to a lot of other horses at that time that were doing well. But he had a very good heart, big heart. I was very careful with him, not over facing him, not asking him questions. He kind of came up through the trials themselves. We had Olympic trials. I think there were 5 or 6 of them. They were definitely the hardest and most difficult things he had ever jumped. And then once we made it through the trials and were on the team, everybody thought I'd lost my mind. But I actually went up to Canada and started jumping really, really small courses. And I think before I went to Barcelona, I probably finished with like a meter 40 course after a month or two, and then shipped them off to Europe or to the games at that time. Like I said, I mean, he was a little short in certain departments, but a big heart and a lot of confidence when he went there and kind of believed what I was telling him. Even then, I remember it was probably the last really, really big, enormous individual games that kind of phased out after that. And I remember standing at the gate and saying, "What the hell am I doing here with this horse?" But he believed in what I was telling him and did his best. He did his best for that day. And again, I remember standing there and watching Milton swim through Oxers, who was a very scopy horse at that time, and thinking, I've got to really ask the question now, but I really think this horse is going to believe in what I'm telling him. So that was like we dodged a bullet.
Dodged a bullet and brought home a medal.
Yeah.
And what's it like? I've only ever spoken to, I think, McLean and asked about being on the podium. And sadly, he said that he always remembers the challenging times when he's up there. He doesn't really live in the glory of it. I wondered, was your experience different? Do you remember standing up there and just feeling like, wow, this is great. This is the culmination of a lot of things?
Well, it is and it isn't. It's the Olympics and whatever successes I had weren't the culmination. I think the culmination is just the day-to-day work and the satisfaction I get doing what I do. And since I stopped riding competitively, I've had to reinvent myself and what makes me happy. And it's really the ability to train well, to still ride well, and still help people connect the dots and do that sort of thing. So I don't look back and think I miss those days. I think they were all a part of the whole career with horses, but I still get probably as much pleasure in riding a horse tomorrow morning at 7:30 a.m. and by myself and making it feel better from after the 45 minutes is over, and or working with somebody and trying to get them to have a feel for the same thing and try to get horses and riders together. And that's to me, again, we all grew up having to do it all, hunters, jumpers, training, young riders, all those things. And I think I really enjoy that. I really enjoy working with Nick, my son, who's we're in business together, and he rides well, he trains well, he has patience. So it's an enjoyment for me to be part of all aspects of the business. It's a thrill to work with a young horse and see it grow. It's fun to when things work out, when you see a horse that you want and you can find a way to buy it and improve it and sell it again for profit. I think those things are good sport, good fun, and they help us all. Horses, in that sense, they help us all. I think it's not really about McLean comes from the same sort. The values that he has are similar because he was taught by somebody of the same generation as his father. So I think he hasn't changed and he won't.
No.
But that's one of the keys to his success.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Well, that's fair enough. Just to shift gears a little bit, I did want to ask about your father, because to be honest, before I started researching you, I had no idea that your father was an American composer. What was that like growing up?
Well, he was not exactly a warm and fuzzy dad, but he was very much a professional musician. He would very intense, very driven. He would when he was home, he would lock himself away with his piano and you'd hear him writing music night and day. And there were moments that I remember where we connected really well, but I don't think he ever saw a horse in his life. He maybe saw a horse in Central Park once, but that was not his gig. And came from a generation of church organists, actually from Italy. And he was the first one that broke that tradition and started writing music and still played a lot today. If you know classical music, then you probably know him.
Mm-hmm.
And my brother's also a classical musician. He followed in my father's footsteps, and my brother and I are really friends and stayed close throughout all the years.
Well, I would imagine what it does seem like you probably got from your father was the drive and the passion just for a different thing.
Yeah. I remember him saying to me, look, if you want to do this, just make sure that you give it what you can. And I'm not going to help you much financially. So there was no financial support. There was support from my wife, Jeannie, and not in the financial sense, but we got together when we were about 18 and went in business together. And she's 50%. So that hasn't changed in all these years. As far as my parents' support of it, not so much, but it was just very different for them and kind of foreign. And they weren't quite sure what I was up to.
I can relate even as an amateur rider. My parents were not on board with it from the very beginning. It was like, if you want to do this, go right ahead. But
Yeah.
it's, yeah. Also coming from a large family with 6 children and just,
Right.
no appreciation for my passion at all. And it's interesting.
No, his concept was really, if you want to be a ditch digger, dig the best ditch you can. But he wasn't against it or for it.
No, well, it appears that you became better than the best as far as the sport's concerned, I think. And what do you feel is your legacy? I've heard a lot about your son being a phenomenal, not just rider, but person. I can tell you, speaking to people here in Ocala, where I've been for the last 5 weeks, there's been nothing but great praise and admiration for him. So what do you feel is his gift?
I think he's a real people person. He understands people. He's very understanding. He's got a lot of emotional intelligence. He's very natural. He's very, very natural with horses. I think that he's had to put up with having me as a father, but I think he does a good job with that. I think it's been a wonderful step for him and his new wife, Jess Mendoza, to get married and to continue on together and help each other out. Jess has her dad and me and as does Nick. And we're all looking forward to the future and what the future is going to bring for them. I think they're a really exciting couple, and we're all in it together.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. And
There's more to you than just the horses. You've also got another child that doesn't ride.
Yes, the smart one in the family.
And what are they doing?
Works for a construction company in Palm Beach Island. She has 2 children, Minnow and little Henry, and they're 3 and 1, and it's been a blast for me.
I bet. And I was going to say, how is it that she escaped the riding bug, or did she have it when she was younger?
She kind of liked it. She was curious. We bought her a little pony named Call Me Monday from Canada. It was a good little pony, a little bit late in her changes. But Daniela just couldn't fathom staying at a horse show all day to ride in one class for 90 seconds. So she was always had her nose in a book and was always had a lot of other interests. But she knows very well what it is. She, is myself and Nick still very much a part of it, and kind of is very aware of our business and how we do things and what we do. So she grew up with it.
And I was going to say, she is the smart one if she figured out you have to spend all day just to get 90 seconds in the ring.
Yeah.
Talked about that recently with Jenna Friedman Lopez. It is quite incredible.
do you have any advice for an amateur rider that you think is something that will take them to the next level?
Advice to an amateur rider?
Mm-hmm. Maybe some little tidbit as far as schooling or attitude or confidence.
I think the things we've touched on are the most important are patience. I think mentoring with somebody that suits their temperament or their style. I think that somebody that's built a certain way mentally and physically to pair up with somebody. And we used to have people would mentor or work for somebody or work with somebody for a while and kind of just hang around and be there. And I think that there's a lot to be said for that more than just getting a job. I think that it's like if you want to be a blacksmith, you want to learn to be the best blacksmith, go hang out with the best blacksmith you can. And you can certainly go to school for it, but that's not maybe quite going to cut it for you. So I think you'll probably learn more with hanging around with the best people you can or people that know the most, or no, not know the most, but have a system that might be something that you would be interested in learning about. And sometimes it's not so much a current name, it can be somebody that is still doing it, but not riding competitively. I remember I did the best I could with a lot of the students I had, but my emphasis was when I threw my leg over a horse, I pretty much had blinders on and wanted to focus on myself and what I was doing competitively. And I think that that's sometimes necessary. I think that there's a little bit of room left over to impart things on other people, but I think it's important and also it's important not just to learn from one person all the time. Just sit in the schooling area and watch, and more than walk a course and see who's doing 6 and who's doing 7, or watch the schooling area, ask questions, do things like that, because that's really where you learn.
So true. I was just saying that to somebody the other day. I think you learn more in that warm-up area before the class.
Yeah, I would just stay there all day. I remember this is my 52nd WEF, and I
Wow.
remember coming here the first few times and just sitting there and watching Jimmy Day from Canada, watching him ride this one or that one, and why was he doing what he was doing. And I was kind of a pain. I was shy, but I would walk up to people and ask. I think most people will give you the time of day if you ask in the right way. So they're interested.
I find in general, riders and trainers are quite generous with their time if they feel like
Yeah,
you're what they have to say.
yeah, yeah. I agree.
Well, Norman, I really, truly appreciate your taking time out to meet with me this morning. And to our listeners, I did want to let you know that Norman is coming off several weeks of 12, 14-hour days. So it doesn't stop just because you're not competing yourself. This business is really about working hard. And so I really appreciate your taking this much time out of your day to just spend with me, knowing that you're going to be back out there training tomorrow.
All
And
right. It was a pleasure. And I hope to see you down the road.
Mhm. And to my listeners in Virginia, I wanted to give you a big shout out. Thanks for the feedback you've been sending. And if you enjoy the show and want to know about upcoming listeners, please follow us on Instagram and Facebook at Horsetails with Kat and share this with your friends.